Well, thank you very much, Peter. Good afternoon. Well, criticism continued to flow from different quarters since Israel's decision to open fire on Palestine citizens. Well, as soon as we heard about this yesterday, when South Africa recalled its ambassador to Israel after at least 52 Palestinians were killed in clashes with Israeli forces during the protest over the EU embassy opening in Jerusalem. When we traced back this matter, the July ANC policy conference recommended the National Conference choose between two options in order to send a strong message about Israel's continued illegal occupation of Palestine and continued human rights abuses against the people of Palestine. Now, the first option was to downgrade South Africa's embassy in Tel Aviv, and the second was a total shutdown of the embassy. Now, today, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions against Israel, BDS, have called for the expulsion of Israeli ambassador to South Africa, Lior Keinan, in order to stand up to what they call the apartheid regime. But how does this new development affect the South Africa-Israeli diplomatic relations? Let's ask Naeem Jeenah, who is Executive Director of the Afro-Middle East Centre, and he is going to tell us his opinion regarding this. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Colin.
Well, last year you wrote an opinion piece just after July about this development. Do you think these shootings were just the last straw?
For the South African government?
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's a combination of things. The main thing was these shootings in Gaza. So yesterday 59 people were gunned down, but over the past 3 weeks, every Friday there have been people who've been shot. Yesterday, as I say, 59 killed and 2,700 injured, many of them maimed. That on the one hand, and then on the other is the issue of the Americans moving their embassy to Jerusalem in violation of international law. And South Africa has been clear that that action needs to be protested against.
Just the issue of the embassy now, let's trace it back. What is wrong with having an embassy in Jerusalem, and what is so holy about the holy city being holy when Israel cannot make a decision about where it wants to have embassies?
Well, Israel has made a decision. It wants its capital to be in Jerusalem. It wants all the embassies to be at what it regards as its capital in Jerusalem. The issue here is not about whether the city is holy or not. The issue is simply that in terms of international law, Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel. That in terms of international law, Israel's occupation of Jerusalem in '67 and its annexation of Jerusalem in 1981 are both illegal. And as an illegal occupier of Jerusalem, it cannot make that its capital. So this is the issue. That's why until Trump decided to move the US embassy to Jerusalem, no other countries really have their embassies in Jerusalem. They all have them in Tel Aviv. Because moving an embassy to Jerusalem gives recognition to an act that is illegal under international law.
Well, we had the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announcing that other countries are allowed and invited to go open embassies there.
Well, Israel has been not inviting but begging countries since just after 1967, begging countries to move their embassies to Jerusalem, but everyone has refused to do so. Even the United States, the US Congress decided in 1995 that it would move its embassy to Jerusalem, but every successive president just never did because of its violation of international law.
Now, in the article that you wrote, you were talking about the implications of the strained relations between Israel and South Africa with regards to trade relations. Can you just unpack that?
Well, at the moment, there's strained relations between the two in terms of diplomacy. Diplomatic relations are strained. South Africa doesn't allow government officials to visit Israel, etc. But at the trading level, trade is booming between the two. Virtually every single year since around 2003, trade between South Africa and Israel has been increasing every year. And this is one of the issues that the Palestine Solidarity Movement in South Africa complains about, that the ANC takes these resolutions but government doesn't follow through. So trade is great from both sides. South Africa exports to Israel, South Africa imports from Israel. There's a few Israeli companies that have investments in South Africa, etc. The issue is that as the ANC was gearing up for its December conference to take a resolution about whether to downgrade the embassy our embassy in Tel Aviv. The pro-Israeli lobby was saying that if that did happen, then that would negatively affect trade relations between South Africa and Israel and would negatively affect Israeli investments in South Africa. And our argument, based on the research we have done, is that it won't. Firstly, South Africa is not calling at all, even if the embassy was downgraded, South Africa is not calling for trade relations to end. The Israelis might decide as a punishment to South Africa, if you like, to do that. But the trade relations are not that significant that if the Israelis pull the plug, it would have any dire consequences on South Africa. And Israel's investments in South Africa actually don't create that many jobs. I mean, the biggest Israeli company in South Africa employs 100 South Africans.
Now, as you know that the US is pro-Israeli, what do you think is going to happen between the South Africa-US bilateral relations?
I don't think this is going to severely impact on South Africa-US relations. I think that the United States would be more unhappy about South Africa in terms of the way that South Africa postures, for example, at the United Nations. South Africa, unlike many other countries that the US would like for them to be its vassals, don't simply go along with what the US or how the US wants it to vote. And that has been a thorn for the Americans, and they have threatened, as you know, to withdraw aid from various countries if this happened. So it's not this issue in particular, but in general, South Africa's position in multilateral organizations that is irritating the Americans.
What's your view regarding the criticism that South Africa is inconsistent in as far as the positions it takes when it comes to foreign policy, the pronouncements that have never been heard regarding Serbia, where hundreds of Muslims were killed during the era of Slobodan Milosevic, and also there's another criticism that says the people of Tibet are living under oppression because even the Dalai Lama could not come to South Africa, but South Africa didn't actually take a stance against China. And also South African soldiers were killed in Equatorial Guinea, but South Africa didn't take a stance or make any pronouncements regarding the diplomatic relations between itself and Equatorial Guinea. What is your view?
I think some of these criticisms are valid in those particular cases. The problem is when one uses whataboutery to say, well, you shouldn't be criticizing the Israelis because look at this other thing, you know. Each issue needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. You might say that South Africa is hypocritical because it should be as harsh on country X because of its actions against its civilians, against its citizens, as it is against Israel. That might be fine, but that doesn't mean that because South Africa might be soft on some other country, that it has to tolerate Israeli massacre of its citizens. So I think that South African foreign policy leaves a lot to be desired, and there's lots that can be criticized about it. We have a new minister, maybe that will make a difference. But detracting from the human rights violations of one state in order to focus on another is problematic, and only the apologists of Israel would do that.
All right, thank you very much for making time to speak to us. We're speaking to Naeem Jeenah, who is the Executive Director of the Afro-Middle East Centre, talking to us about the latest impasse between South Africa and Israel.